Hello. So today I'm delighted to interview Lucy O Hagan, who is the founder of Wild Awake, and she is an amazingly inspiring woman. And I'm going to let her talk a little bit about herself and introduce herself first.
Hello, Sophie. Enchantée. Thank you so much for having me today. Um, yeah, I'm really thrilled to be here and to be speaking with you. Um, so my name is Lucy O Hagan. I take she, her, and they, them pronouns. Um, I am originally from Belfast, and today I find myself in my heart home, which is Donegal in County Donegal. Um, and yeah, I don't, that's all I can say for now.
There's so many things you could say, I imagine. But
Yeah.
maybe tell us a little bit about Wild Awake and what brought you to found it and your journey, because you've so many skills to your CV. It's amazing.
It's been a very, yeah, it's been an amazing 6 years, really. Um, yeah, I mean, there's so many places that any of us could start from, I guess. And if I think about what really brought me to find Wild Awake, it was in 2015. I did my forest school training in County Wicklow. And yeah, that really reawakened something in me. I remember very vividly doing the training and just feeling like this real strong something reawakening in me that was like had been lying dormant for a long time. And it was that connection with nature. It was that strong feeling of empowerment in my body, of belonging with the natural world. And yeah, I just, just when you find that thing that speaks to you, that really sings to your soul. um, I was, I was so happy at the end of that training. I was just like, this is it. So I finished that training. It's a year-long training. It's incredible. I'm now part of the training team for delivering that in Ireland. And I was just so hungry for more. It was like, okay, we've just touched the surface of so many different things, from, the woodland skills to the plants to the tracking and animals to neuroscience and behavior and, all of these different things. And yeah, I was just so hungry for more. So I started to go over to a school in England, in Sussex, called the Woodcraft School, which is where I met my teacher and friend, John Ryder. And I just traveled back and forth to there for about 2.5 years, studying ethnobotany and bushcraft and wildlife tracking and trailing. I just became entirely obsessed. It was like, yeah, I just wanted more and more. And then it was after finishing the bushcraft instructor course, which was a year-long program. It was 1 week a month for 10 months. And as soon as I finished that, and I had met my other teacher, Lynx Filden, by this time as well, which really ignited this love for ancestral skills and for the whole kind of community regeneration piece and the soulful aspect of the work that I bring now. That I founded Wild Awake in 2017 as a way of bringing together everything that I had been doing up to that point. And I mean, it's constantly evolving and changing and growing and shedding and deepening. And yeah, I can see it feels like with every kind of turn of the sun and every kind of festival that it changes.
Did you grow up in a family that had that kind of ecological awareness and wisdom and connection to nature?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I did. My mom was, I think she was very aware of wanting us to have a connection with nature. Her and my granny loved gardening. My mom would have brought us out picking blackberries and hazelnuts. My dad would have brought us out fishing for crayfish in the canals in Kildare. My brother loved hunting and fishing, so I would have tagged along with him as much as possible. Yeah, I mean, I was born in Belfast and I lived in Belfast until I was 8. And then my mum moved us away from Belfast. I think because of the political, yeah, the political implications of growing up there, she moved us out to the countryside. To a town that was really infinitely more sectarian than anything I had experienced in Belfast. But that's kind of just the water that you swim in up there. But we moved out to her partner at the time, land that he owned, and it was, lots of fields and small copses of woodlands and wells and streams. And that was really the place that I went to feel safe all the time. So that was.
Sorry. Which part of Northern Ireland was that? What was the name of the?
It was called Ballynahinch. It's in County Down. Yeah.
Lovely.
So yeah, I lived there until I was about 15, and then I moved back to Belfast. Went to punk gigs for about 7 years. And then did the forest school training, and that's when I kind of brought it back to what I had known and loved as a young person.
And what drew you to that forest school training? What was the trigger? Why going all the way to Wicklow? And
yeah, I mean, I had always worked with young people. I'm starting to realize that even when I was growing up, I was involved with my local youth club. So I had a real passion of working with young people. And those were those are the things that, sorry, there's somebody at the door, so I was a bit distracted. Um, yeah, and then I became more involved with education, and I worked with as an Erasmus teaching assistant in Reunion and Guadeloupe, and I always had this passion for nature, and I wanted to bring the two together. And when I tried to do this through working with schools, what I always experienced was a separation, that nature was something that we were to look at but not touch, and this kind of inherent idea that somehow we were harmful to nature. And it just never sat right with me to teach children that, because my first hand experience was that it was through playing in fields and making dens and foraging for blackberries or whatever, that's where my love came from, and that was what drove me to want to protect the world around me. So that was there. And then I read this book by Richard Louv called Last Child in the Woods. It's kind of like a seminal work now on nature connection and this idea of what he calls nature deficit disorder. And in this book, he talked about forest schools. And yeah, for me, it brought together everything that had made sense to me up to that point. And I was suddenly finding out that it's a thing, I can go and get trained in this. So as soon as I read that book, I looked up forest schools in Ireland. I found Ciara Hinksman of Forest School Ireland, and I signed up for the next training. So yeah, it happened very quickly.
wonderful. And can you tell us a little bit about what is your relationship to the world, the word wild? You were talking about how schools, see nature and working with nature, and how, from your work and your experience with working with young people and older adults as well, What is wild? What is the word? What does it evoke for you and in your relationship with others?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting word, and it kind of pops up all over the place now, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit of a buzzword. The
It's
same
so
with rewild, actually.
same with Rewild as well, and it's really interesting to think about it, because either it's completely vilified and demonized, or it's really romanticized. It's feels like there's these two extremes of it. um and I mean, at its root, it's about like undoing domestication. It's about like breaking free of these cages of civilization, and yeah, it's the antithesis to how our world is organized now, in patriarchy and in capitalism. It's that which can't be tamed, and that is within us. That, like, I'm sure with your amazing work, of like how old our brain stem is, like how old our nervous system is, that is the wild that is in us. And then there is like this wild outside of us in this world that is uncontrollable, and yet we try to control it so often,
Mm.
and harm it. So there's such a fear of this word, and yeah, it's so beautiful, um,
And there's a change around, there's a shift at the moment from uh, relating to the wild with fear
mhm.
and relating to the wild with excitement, which
Yeah.
is very interesting. How you recently launched an amazing program called The Great Awakening, and
Wild
it's
awakening.
the Wild Awakening. Sorry.
There's a word for it.
It's, I'm sure, going to be greatly awakening. And it was booked out within hours.
Yeah,
So,
it's pretty
yeah.
amazing. Yeah, yeah, and I mean, like, that program is so much a response for me to this word of rewilding, and the word of wild, and what I do worry about and what I witness is how commodified this word has become, and it's like people will use the word rewild to sell like shoes or a mattress or something, and I think it's really important for us to really like catch that when it happens, and to question, who is selling me this, or what are people profiting out of, because that is profiting from a deep yearning within all of us to break free from civilization and from these ways that we are unnaturally put into these boxes, or into these ways of life, or schools or offices or whatever it is, these systems which are inherently unhealthy for us, and harm us and harm the earth. um, so for me, it was a response to this use of the word rewild, and actually it's like this has been my journey with the word, with the ethos, with the movement of rewilding, which is, it's what at once about ourselves and our inner world and this relationship with the soul, um, and it's also our relationship to the earth, and how we can, because we know that humans aren't inherently flawed. In our ancestors, indigenous people have lived in a regenerative way with the earth for a really long time, and still do when they're able to. And it's like, how do we, it's almost like a relearning of how to be human, that is deep within us. And it's like, how do we behave in a regenerative way, like how can we interact with the world whilst, knowing that we make an impact, how can we make that impact a regenerative one? So there's that part of it, which is the ecological restoration part, which through this program will look like seed saving and learning how to harvest plants respectfully and sustainably, with like learning how to plant willow, and planting things as we go along. That was really important for me, for that to be a part of it. And then also like this, the ancestral skills part, obviously, which I can speak about a little bit more.
Yes,
Yeah,
to wish, because when we hear ancestral skills, I guess a lot of people will wonder, what do you mean?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm so funny. I'm getting my website remade at the moment, and the website designer is saying, "Would you not consider changing it to something different?" I'm like, "No, I'm so attached, so attached to this word." Do you know, essentially, ancestral skills were known as primitive skills, but with you know how primitive, and like my background is anthropology, so I'm aware of the use of the word primitive and how it's been used to oppress indigenous people and our ancestors. So there has been a big movement within that culture to move away from the use of the word primitive and to use the word ancestral instead. And I mean, I just think it sounds so much more beautiful anyway. It's so evocative. But ancestral skills are the skills of our ancestors, but particularly like our far back ancestors, you know, so prehistory. Um, so it's working with the land, it's working with, you know, what we have here without modern tools. So you know, I'm sitting here in Donegal and I know that there's like lots of granite and slate and quartz, and thinking about how can I use tools, how can I make tools from those rocks, and then thinking about the fauna that live here, and yeah, you know, walking along the beach today and being able to track like, okay, the hare was here, here's the hare's form, here's the hare's scat, there was a fox here, there's a fox kill. So it's kind of tuning in with those skills of our ancestors to the place that we find ourselves in.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, it's fire lighting, it's basketry, it's hide tanning, it's tool making, it's clothes making, it's
Foraging.
foraging, of course, as well. Yeah, it's all of those skills that got us to where we are now. And for me, they're just a vehicle, really. You know, like I love them, and I love crafting, but it's what happens within us when we engage in those skills, and what happens as a community when we practice those skills together and sit around the fire together. And that was really the magic of learning with links, and learning in that community was not actually the skills, you know. I think up until that point when I've been doing bushcraft, it was like, okay, the skills, the skills, the skills. And then when I met her and I started to learn in that way, it was like, these are really cool and I love them, but actually they're only conduits to get us into like community and to all of the really juicy, important work that comes up with that around conflict navigation and sharing gratitude and sharing grief and understanding our own privileges and power. And you know, it's like all of the social implications of this work are yeah, it's so important. Mm-hmm. And also so great for our nervous systems to be learning in that way, where it's, you know, you can look around, you know, and see yourself as belonging to everything that is around us, and recognize like your place within that community of fellow humans, but the rest of the community as well. Yeah, it's constantly these ripples in and out, I feel.
Yeah. Can you tell us, you mentioned Lynx, can you tell us a little bit about her and how you met her? Who is she? Because she's quite an influence in your
Yeah, yeah. So she actually just did a television program on Channel 4. I don't know if you saw it, called Surviving the Stone Age. But it's actually really well made. And it's so beautiful to see a program like that made, where it's not super sensationalized or people just arguing, or all of these stereotypes that we have about our ancestors. You know, they lived for 1 month, as close to how we think our ancestors might have lived, in the Bulgarian mountains. And it was just really beautiful, and of course hard, because we are not we are not those people anymore, and we don't have that intense relationship to place which would help us to thrive in those areas.
And we're talking about hunter-gatherer,
Yeah, yeah,
not so before Neolithic time, before agriculture.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Before things went wrong.
Yes, before we lost our health.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, she's an incredible woman. She really lives what she teaches, which is always so inspiring. Um, she and now she runs classes. So she will do either week long or month long or 3 month long. Previously, she would have ran 6 month long programs for people in the States, and she would kind of bring people from very basic skill level to completing a 1 month long Stone Age project at the end, which was, I was supposed to go and work with her to deliver that in America last year, but something else happened, or no, this year, yeah. So yeah, now she's moved to Norway, and her dream is to kind of create a sort of human sanctuary, she terms it, where people will come and live from the land. And yeah.
Is she from Norway originally, or is she's British?
She's kind of all over the place. She's from London, is where she grew up, and her mother's Swedish, but she spent a lot of her life in North America.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, she will be doing classes from Norway, and I'm sure France again, and Sweden too.
Oh yes, she offers these, I think it's a week long, or is it 2 weeks?
Yeah, so usually you can do a 1 week basic skills class, and that's, if you do that, then she will accept you for maybe a month long or a 3 month long program.
Good idea.
Yeah, yeah. But I met her in Galway, actually. She taught a class. It was her second time in Ireland. And we spent a week building a coracle and making bonefish hooks and nettle cordage fishing line, and yeah, just bringing together all of, she called it the fisherman, the course. And at the end of it, we brought this coracle out to Loch Corrib and spent a night sleeping on an island there and fishing. And yeah, I just fell in love. I fell in love with everything about it, and particularly with the community aspect. You know, there were young children there were elders there, and everybody was deeply connected to the earth and deeply connected to a future where everybody was valued and the earth was valued. And it was really, there was heart at the center of everything that happened there, you know, which was such a relief after, although I love and have so much respect for my teacher, John in England. You know, bushcraft just did not resonate with me on a deep soul level at all. You know, it kind of attracts a certain demographic of people, and for me it was really important to have that, I suppose, that space where I could be vulnerable as well and explore how my connection to the land was also tied up with lots of other things related to the self or related to the social systems that we live in. Or
Can you tell us a little bit about John and what do you mean by bushcraft? Because not everybody knows either.
Yeah. I suppose bushcraft became really popular with Ray Mears, like maybe people, that's their first impression of it. He did a TV series on, I'm not sure what channel, but it really projected it into the kind of public norm, or at least the awareness. So bushcraft is, it's still this relationship with the land and with a desire for self-sufficiency and going out into a natural space, into the woods. And I mean, I'm really aware of the language that I'm drawn to using, because it's like trying to survive, But I know that there are so many different people within that sphere that I don't want to paint everybody with the same brush. But my experience of it was much more over nature than in it and with it, and trying to survive it rather than trying to live there and have a relationship with the place. But John is, he's a naturalist. That's where he comes from. He has taught bushcraft for a long time. He taught with Ray Mears. Really now his passion is wildlife tracking, and he's one of the best wildlife trackers in Northern Europe. And he came over there recently, 2 weeks ago, to do this cyber tracker evaluation. So yeah, cyber tracker, I feel like I need to explain this because
that's one of my questions. Because that's fascinating for me.
Yeah.
I must say, I love the idea of possibly, like you mentioned before in a podcast, that to you tracking was going back to source. And to me, that's so beautifully put. And I would love for you to explain a little bit about that, about what you mean by going back to source, and basically like connecting at a very, very deep level with an animal through what they've done in nature, what the prints they've left in nature.
Yeah, I think for me personally, it's one of the most sacred acts that I do is wildlife tracking. Yeah, I mean, there's so many threads to it that one, I come to understand myself as not the catalyst or the protagonist of a story, that there are so many stories unfolding around us all the time. And especially during this year when so much has stopped for us and we've been confined to these, really small radiuses of our homes. That was such it was such a healing source for me to go out and to know that the lives of these animals were just continuing, and in some cases really thriving.
Tell us more about that. What have you noticed in terms of that?
Well, I mean, I suppose thinking back to the beginning of lockdown in March, when, I don't know how much truth there was in these stories about, but people talking about the canals in Venice clearing up and dolphins coming back to places, and people just stopping and hearing the birds' song more, It's maybe not that those animals weren't always there, but us as human beings were suddenly noticing them and cultivating that awareness.
And in your day-to-day where you live in County Meath, how did you notice the changes, or did you notice?
I mean, I'm a really busy person, for all of the work that I do around reconnection and encouraging other people to slow down. I I don't take that much time for myself to do it, and that is, you know, that's hard, and I always have to be really conscious of that in myself, that I'm tending to my own well source, you know, before sharing that with other people. So for me to have so much time off in the spring, which is, you know, sometimes my busiest time of year, was incredible and so moving. And I just spent days just walking barefoot around the land and tracking and foraging and swimming and, you know, doing loads of hide tanning and loads of basket weaving and just really immersing myself in the land where I was and meeting my neighbors. You know, I didn't know my neighbors before that. I was really lucky where I was living. It's a different place to where I live now, but it was also a place with lots of land. So
Where'd you live?
I lived on, I both times I've lived on private estates in Meath. So really these places with such, you know, such bizarre and painful histories, you know, of colonization, but they're the places where there's lots of land and huge big trees that haven't been cut down and really beautiful old oaks. And so yeah, like both times I just rent a little cottage, and the place that I lived in the first lockdown was 500 acres, and on that land there was an old marsh where there was remains of an old crannog. And yeah, a crannog is like I'm trying to think what might be the Neolithic. They're structures that were built in watery places, so lakes or estuaries, usually with oak, and they're thatched roofs, and they're kind of people. There's lots of different suggestions of what they were used for, whether it was for storing animals or where people lived. But yeah, from really old, really old structures, you know.
Yeah.
So it was just a beautiful place to find myself, and yeah, it was.
Is that Killian Manor?
That's where I live now.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's where you live now. Yeah,
that's
because
where I
I
live
saw that's where part of your training is taking place.
Yeah, so I feel so fortunate to have been asked to live there, and yeah, myself and my partner live there. He's a musician, so we're both just really thriving and having a little bit more space, and living with people who share such a similar vision as us to nature and to rewilding and to art and music and creativity and community, and that's really, it's so valued there. So
lovely. Yeah, and I've been there. It's a beautiful place. Yeah, really beautiful.
I'm excited because we just moved in October, so it was beautiful to be there for the change of the leaves, and I'm really excited for seeing spring blossom there, and yeah, to have a place to work from as well. It's the shortest commute I've ever had. I think.
Especially in our times of restrictions, etc. I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
So tell us a little bit more about the cyber tracker.
Yeah.
And how it came about, etc.
Yeah.
What it involves.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think people are usually put off by the word cyber, and it's kind of all of us who are involved with cyber tracker wish that wasn't there. So confusing for people. Essentially, cyber tracker was developed in Namibia by a man called Louis Liebenberg with the Sand Bushmen. So wildlife tracking, obviously being an indigenous skill set that is really, it's such an integral part to the San culture. And Louis started working with the San people to kind of bring employment into the communities, and also to to sustain their lifeways and this ancient skill that was so important to all of us, that it's preserved. And he was doing this by asking people to record in like little handheld cyber things, if they saw, you know, the tracks of a zebra or a cheetah or whatever it was, that they would input this into the cyber thingy, and that would go up to a satellite and go to a database. So they would gather information about where animals were, both for conservation of those animals and also to tackle poaching in the area. And then they started to realize that they were getting reports of animals where they shouldn't have been. So they were realizing, okay, actually, it's not that everybody here is an amazing tracker. You know, some people are really good trackers and some people aren't. So they decided together that they needed to develop a system so that trackers could go through like this process of evaluation to find out, okay, how good of a tracker are you, and could you use this software? And then also that those people could go through this learning to become better trackers, which yeah, I mean, has brought a lot of kind of employment into that area. And also, like, I just really appreciate that way of approaching this ancient skill, that it's something that anybody can learn, and it's not something that you're innately born with. It's like you work to improve. So yeah, this system was developed there, and then people from North America went over and they brought it back to North America. So it's very popular there. And then it was brought to Europe, and then John brought it to the UK. So it was the first cyber tracker evaluation in Ireland there 2 weeks ago. So that was really exciting. It's been many years that I've wanted to bring it over to Ireland, but there just wasn't the community, there wasn't the interest just yet. So we ran 2 evaluations back to back that were both full.
How many?
Nothing about the internet on it. It's 2 days where you go out and you spend 2 days where you're asked questions. So you answer about 60 questions in total. And those questions can range from quite easy questions like what track is this, and it might be a dog track, to really hard questions. So it could be about insect sign or bird tracks, or just obscure pieces of sign that really require an understanding of animal behavior and a dedication to the skill and the art of tracking. But it's also, you know, it's an evaluation, and it's a world-class evaluation, but it's also a teaching opportunity as well. So, you know, John would ask the question and people would give their answers, but he would then go back to, you know, the track or the piece of sign and say, what is this, and why do you think it's that? And we would go into this, what I think is such an ancient thing to do, of just standing around a track and figuring out together what it is and why it is that. And that's something that the Sand Bushmen teach us, is that we shouldn't track alone, you know, and that they wouldn't necessarily always take the answer of the best tracker. It's more like, how do you come together to make that decision in consensus with all the evidence that is there?
Beautiful.
It's amazing, you know, like it's just so fascinating. And like when I was this morning, you know, I was nervous for this to begin, and I thought, okay, I'll just go out and I'll go to the beach and I'll go tracking, because inevitably what happens for me is, you know, we go into this, like my brain slows down, I start to become more aware of my body, and I'm really just observing what I can see and gathering all of that information. And yeah, it's just, it's so magic. And then, so the track and sign is one part of it, and then the other part is trailing. So while track and sign is looking at the kind of signs and clues that animals have been here, trailing brings all of that together so that you follow an animal, and the aim is to see the animal. And here we can really only do that with deer here.
Okay.
because they leave a trail.
Yeah.
Whereas in other places it could be, in North America, they trail bears and mountain lions, and in Africa they trail rhinos and loads of things.
Yeah.
Um,
What about foxes and things like that here? Would you be able to trail a fox or?
these really soft padded animals that are, they don't leave that much of a trail.
Okay.
Whereas deer, they have the hard nails on their hoof, so you
Mm.
can actually, and I have, like, find a fresh trail, which is one part of it, and then follow that trail until you see the deer, and the deer doesn't see you.
Mm-hmm.
So you're so aware of the wind, like what direction the wind is coming from, so that you don't blow your scent towards the animal. You're listening to the birds as well, because the birds can alarm that you're there. And obviously all the animals are listening to the birds. It's like woodland news. And and then it's like this whole process of inner tracking, which is really, I'm so fascinated by, because inevitably it brings up so much stuff inside of ourselves, and
Lovely.
you're tracking that inside of yourself and really trying to cultivate this quiet mind, because you're not going to see a deer if you have all the chatter inside your brain. So I think when people talk about nature connection and nature awareness, for me it's one of the top ways to feel that interconnectedness with everything. It's really magical and mystical, but so founded in reality, and it's in our bones as well. It's such an ancient blueprint inside of ourselves.
Beautiful. And how have you witnessed the responses of the people that you've taught in terms of, for example, for school, you've been teaching in the Phoenix Park, I
Mm-hmm.
understand,
Mm-hmm.
and doing urban kind of forest school training with uh, mainly young people or adults as well?
A little bit of both. So the Phoenix Forest School I founded in 2015. And yeah, I work with mostly young people through that, up to the ages of 12. I also do some work with teenagers in rites of passage, but also teenagers with forest school, and then training adults. And then kind of through Wild Awake, I have been running a program called Rewild in the City.
Mm.
That's a monthly donation-based rewilding class for adults to kind of grow this movement of rewilding in Ireland. But I mean, it's so moving, because some of the children that I've been working with, they've been coming to the forest school for 5 years, so to see that in them now, and a lot of them want to be forest school practitioners. They are like, okay, Lucy, when are you clocking off? We'll take over. And like, that's all I could ever wish for, is that, it makes me so sad that my work exists, like, and it's so, like, it's just awful that, what we experienced as children, being able to go out the door and not come home until dinner. And that's not that long ago. I'm 31 in a couple of days, and my experience of childhood was so much different to these young people, and I grew up in a city. Yeah, so to see their connection, and especially over lockdown, I was getting so many videos from their parents of their children, showing them where to harvest the wild garlic, and showing them the poisonous lookalikes, and pointing out tracks, and showing them how to, like, really just, it's the children that are reconnecting their parents to nature. And yeah, that's just, for me, that's all I ever could wish for. It's,
Mhm.
yeah, it's such a gift. It's really a gift.
It's wonderful to have a park like that in a big capital city like Dublin as well. It's such an
It's
opportunity for
amazing.
people
Yeah,
to source and resource and yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
The adults who come to my classes are stunned. They're just that you could have this sense of being in a wild place in the center of Dublin. It's such an incredible place, and like actually, you know, it could be so much better as well. It really could. But this is where we're at now, and it's just such a blessing for it to be there, and so amazing that so many people have actually started to realize the true potential of it over this year.
Mm-hmm. And yes, there's been a big campaign around banning the cars, I guess, from it.
Yeah.
That's what you mean in terms of how it could get better, I imagine.
Yeah. I mean, they had proposed a whole new, they wanted to introduce retail into the park, and they wanted to do all sorts of things. And there was a huge public outcry about it, and they dropped the whole thing. And I mean, I think it was really a very difficult decision for them to reopen the park to cars, and they might change their mind again. I'm really fortunate to have a really good relationship with the OPW in the park, and I see that they're, you know, really trying to satisfy thousands of voices, you know, that they receive and they hear all the time.
Is it still John who's heading the Phoenix Park
No,
team?
well, the chief superintendent is Margaret Gormley, who's
Okay.
the woman who gave the okay for me to start the forest school there, and they've just been so supportive. You know, they help me with all the stumps that I need cut, or the woodland management, and they're just have been, I just have a really great relationship with them in the park, and feel very honored to be the only person that's allowed to light a fire in the Phoenix Park. You know, it's pretty extraordinary, really. But they value what we're doing there so much, and see the need for it. So
it's wonderful, because that's one of the few parks as well where they leave places to grow wild, with wild meadows, and there's no mowing, and
particularly the place that I work in, the Furry Glen. It's kind of the conservation hub of the park, and they call it conservation, but it's they leave the trees to rot, and they let it do its thing to a certain extent.
Wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe your 4 months in the wild, and what's happened there with lynx? Is there anything that you could tell us, like in terms of the major lessons that you've learned in the wild, living like a hunter gatherer?
I mean, it was so transformational. I spent 1 month in Les Aisies, which is considered to be the epicenter of prehistory in Europe. And we were living on a really beautiful biodynamic farm with horses, and a huge big river, and an enormous kind of cave overhang. We spent 1 month. We were 14 people.
That's in the Dordogne.
In the Dordogne, and we spent 3 weeks like making baskets and learning how to tan hides, and forage food, and preserve food, and tracking and hunting. And then the last week we did a walkabout with our pack baskets and all the tools and things that we had made around these chestnut forests of the Dordogne, which is extremely sore when you're barefoot. The chestnut nuts they're so spiky. But I mean, it was so beautiful. I mean, that whole area is just so incredible, like so many caves. And there are these caves which are preserved, like Lascaux and Fond de Gomme, but there are so many caves that are just open, you know, and you can go and sleep in them, and
how was that?
Hmm?
How was that? How did it change you? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it really changed me. And I think something that people aren't really aware of about me was like, I've struggled with anxiety and depression like so much of my life. And like that month in particular just blew me open. It was to be seen in community that way, in all the ways, and to still be loved and accepted, and was really important for my growth. Um, and yeah, that was a huge part of what attracted me to links and to that way of learning. That it's there is a lot of inner self work that happens just by living that way, and that you're living outside for that long, and living, like practicing the ways to live in community for that long was, yeah, it was really transformational. And I suppose if I was to pick one moment, it was a grief ceremony that we held in the last week that we were there. And it was in the tradition of Sabumfu Some. And Sabumfu Some is an incredible woman. She's no longer in this realm. But her late husband, Malidome Some, some people would be familiar with. So they had brought this grief practice and grief ritual from, I can't remember if it was East or West Africa, but the Dagara people.
I think it's the West.
The West, yeah. So she traveled to North America and saw how grief adverse we were as a society. And obviously in Ireland with the keening practice, we would have had like this intense relationship with grief and recognized it as integral to the health of community, that we are given opportunities to release it and to share it and to transform it. So this ceremony was held from her teachings. The person who held it had learned with her, and also in the teachings of Joanna Macy and how she holds grief ceremony. And it was just so powerful. We were in a cave and we were sitting around a fire, and we'd spent 1 month together. And it was just, yeah, it was just such a huge release. It was such a huge release for me. And I try to make a point of having grief rituals now at least twice a year. It's just, I mean, it's tending to the self, which tends to community, which tends to the earth. I think it's really important work. And it's, yeah, we'll hold one as part of the Wild Awakening as well.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that was a real turning point for me, actually. It's just the kind of the peace that you feel after a ceremony like that is, yeah, it's amazing.
It's probably one of the reasons I'm thinking why we as society suffer from the anxiety and depression. It's the fact that there's no outlet to express our fears, to express our anger, to express our grief, and Joanna Macy, through her work that reconnects, really harnessed that. It's wonderful that we can. But again, it's like what you said about for a school training. It's such a pity that we have to create these kind of workshops. It just shows what we've lost in many ways. So, yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about the other journey that you've done in terms of Stone Age living in the Arctic? Because I read some of your blog posts around that. It was unreal. Living below zero temperatures. It's amazing.
So much fun. Yeah, I mean, I'm so grateful that we got to do that before coronavirus hit, because we were in the Arctic and we started to hear there's this thing called blah blah. So yeah, this was also through links. And it's a place called Kariki Stone Age Center in northern Finland. And we had lived there for 3 weeks the summer before, and when I did the 3-month long program. And it's funny because the summer that I was there was the huge heat wave, where it was 39 degrees in northern Finland. There was like permafrost melting, there were forest fires. And then suddenly I was back there in, it was late February. So it was just a week-long project with a group of friends. We all knew each other very well. The youngest was 2, called Tindra, and we were 12 people, and we were staying at the museum. They have kind of a recreation of these birch bark huts, so we just moved in there for a week. So, you know, very fortunate that we had those, and that we had a firewood. You know, there was firewood there for us. It's kind of all these things that you realize how different it would have been, you know, that we were dropped into this moment in time. So in lots of ways were things that made it really easy. So yeah, I mean, it felt a little bit like a holiday in that we'd spent, you know, months preparing, making our clothes. I had tanned a lot of roadkill furs, so foxes and pine martens. I had made a lot of clothes from deer skins. I'd felted a lot, and then we arrived up there. And what was challenging in the beginning was it was actually warm. It was maybe 2 or 3 degrees, and our clothes weren't suitable for that temperature. So we couldn't really go outside because it was so wet, and our shoes were made for snow. So the first couple of days were really challenging, and then the temperatures dropped to -15, which is what we wanted, really. So that it was completely snow and all of our clothes were suitable for what we wanted. So it was just a week of crafting. Like, I made some snowshoes, and we had one reindeer that was killed by a local reindeer herder for us when we arrived, which was so beautiful to see the respect and the precision with which he killed and processed this animal. It was like the knife was just an extension of his hand. It was amazing.
And a Sami person?
No, he wasn't Sami actually, but we did previously to that had spent some time with Sami and their reindeer. But it was kind of just an amazing week of crafting and eating loads of reindeer and sitting around the fire and singing and dreaming up things together, and listening to the sound of the ice. You know, it was a huge takeaway. It was just the mornings and the evenings. We were all sleeping together with all of our reindeer skins over us, and just hearing the ice breaking and cracking and refreezing. And
were you outdoors? No, you had built
well, so this museum had these already purpose-built huts, so it was kind of quite a large hut that we could all sleep in. So that's what I mean, you know, there was so many parts of it that were so easy, you know. We started to talk about these different levels of Stone Age immersion, you know, because there are times when you just go into it with nothing. I mean, everything that you've made and everything that you've prepared and gathered. And then these other times when it's like, okay, well, how do we want to do this level, or do we want to do this much? But yeah, I mean, it was such a beautiful experience. And yeah, as I say, I'm so grateful that that was my entry into this year. You know, I had that kind of fire inside me, and yeah.
So, and what else did you do this year with the restrictions? How did it impact you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as I said before, the springtime and a lot of that was just spent being with the land and crafting and hide tanning. I did loads of hide tanning. It was yeah, it was such a therapeutic practice for me to start with this really disgusting, fragile skin and transform it into something really beautiful and supple and soft. It was, for me, it was a much, yeah, it was a wider representation of what was happening in the world for me, you know.
How
And
do you go about hide tanning? You mentioned road kills, so you find dead animals.
yeah,
Uh-huh. Tell us a little bit more.
yeah. So if I'm driving, or some of, you know, I keep just spreading this into the world. If you ever come across something, you can call me. Yeah, it's important that they're not, that they're in good shape, you know. And I think I'm always so upset when I see a beautiful wild animal that's just been mashed into the road, you know, like it's just such a waste of life. Um, and so for me, that hide tanning is honoring that life, you know, and picking the animal up from the road and taking the skin and transforming that into something beautiful, which I can wear, and means that, you know, it's, yeah, it's definitely something that people find. Some people find a lot of difficulty with it, you know, but it's a real, yeah, it's a really sacred act for me to do that. And then I will leave the body in the woods for other animals, or I'll maybe take the skull or the bones for jewelry or for education as well. So yeah, I really like, a big part of this is trying not to waste anything, you know, so that could be the skin, or it could be tanning the stomachs, or using the intestines for sewing thread, or rendering the fat for using. It's like our ancestors knew that every part of the animal had a use, you know, had a service for us. And you wouldn't waste it, because you probably would have killed it yourself, or somebody would have killed it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I practice traditional methods of hide tanning. So it's all natural. And at any point, if you were to leave that item of clothing on the ground, it would just go back to the earth, you know. So, and there's just such a, I mean, it feels so special to wear it. You know, I have a little eel skin belt on today, and the eel skins come from Loch Ness. And there's a real history and a heritage of wild fishing the eels there. And when I started to get eel skins off them, they told me, oh yeah, people used to know how to tan the skins, but we don't know how to do it anymore. So it's such an honor to kind of go back to these people and say, well, here, you know, this is how we do it. And we don't want these old ways to be lost, because there's such beauty in them, and there's such, I mean, it makes loads of sense as well. And it can really, I think it can really regenerate a kind of different kind of economy into a community. So yeah, like that's hide tanning for me. So I, this year I ran a deer skin to buckskin class in Glengariff, which
Deer
is,
skin to buckskin.
yeah, so buckskin, there's kind of like, there's fat tanning, or there's bark or vegetable tanning. And bark or vegetable tanning is kind of like the leather that we're familiar with. And buckskin is almost like suede. It's really buttery and soft. And
Yes.
so bark tanning, the leather tanning, it takes a much longer time. Whereas the fat tanning we can do in a weekend. So it's like, it's really physically, emotionally intense work. But like such a transformation, and I really see it as transformative work. And we were in Glengariff, you know, surrounded by these ancient oaks. It was a full moon. There was the Sika deer were barking because it was the rutting season. So, and we had this beautiful ceremony to open the weekend. And yeah, it was really, really, really powerful
Wow.
weekend.
Amazing.
So another thing that I was grateful to be able to teach that class before I couldn't teach anymore.
Are there many of you around in Ireland?
Um, there's, There's a woman called Sky Maria over in Galway who also teaches sheepskin tanning. And there are a few people teaching fish skin tanning now, but it's, I mean, no, it's totally niche, you know, and
Yeah.
it's my hope with teaching more of these classes is that there's more people who become really interested in it, and especially with hide tanning, because there's so little known about it. You know, it wasn't really written down, and it was a very kind of like outsider practice. So when more people are learning it, then yeah, we're all learning together. And I have a lot of friends in the UK who are teaching tanning. I say a lot, there's maybe 10. So, you know, everybody's so generous with their knowledge, and kind of like the Foragers Association as well. It's like we all want this to do well, you know, we kind of all want, you know, our jobs to be obsolete, you know, like it's like we're dreaming into this future that we want to create, and through that is this gorgeous community that forms around it.
And it's buoyant. It's quite. It's growing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Like I really, you know, I have so much respect for the people whose shoulders I'm standing on, you know, because I remember going to like a foraging class in Belfast, maybe, you know, 15 years ago, and there were not that many people at it. And it was really this really obscure thing that people were doing. And now it's, you know, it's kind of on trend now, and it's amazing. And I'm just so, yeah, so grateful to the people whose books and who I've learned from. And so amazing to be a part of an association with those people now as well. You know, it's very humbling.
And it's so needed. I mean, I have a sense, I don't know what's your sense, but I have a sense that it's going to root itself more and more, and that it's going to be growing into a lot more than a trend, I imagine.
Yeah.
What's your sense? There's a big storm out there. It's so funny. I'm just looking at branches crashing on the window.
Forever that I've looked out the window in Donegal and been like, oh, it's really nice here.
And I'm in Dublin, and it's wild.
Wild. Our time. Yeah, I mean, I really think, especially this year, people have realized how important nature is to all of us. And that's really going to propel this so much faster. And I mean, like forest school as well, like there's so many forest school practitioners trained in Ireland now. We have, I think, 8 I think there's maybe 8 trainings planned for this year that are all fully booked. You know, it's our time. Yeah, I mean, it's finally, you know, that and I really hope that we can all approach this with, yeah, with love and integrity and wishes for the future that are based in, yeah, love and compassion and dignity. And
what I'm hearing as well from listening to what you're saying is that there's a huge need for bringing back the sense of the sacred in everything we do, and in our relationship, and in our relating with everyone and the non-human world as well. So I hear that you've just launched a ritual, a rite of passage kind of series of workshops. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And
yeah, rites of passage is work that I've been really deepening and developing over the past like 3 years. And myself and my co-guide, Catherine McCabe, who's an amazing social ecologist, we ran a pilot program last year for young people, and that was a 9-month-long program, which we finished over Zoom, which was really interesting. And we're now relaunching this. So yeah, I mean, that work it's so important to me, and it's, you know, it's really a dedication to on the one hand, it's a dedication to myself, like, and you know, my teenage self who, you know, if I know, and I have heard this from so many people, that if I or they had something like this as a teen, it would have made such a difference. And I really believe that rites of passage are integral to the health of our communities and to the earth. So yeah, we're relaunching True Nature, which is a youth rites of passage program, and there'll be two main age brackets from 13 to 15 and 15 to 18, and these will be like, it won't be the same structure of 9 months. It will be much more immersive, intensive weeks, and longer, for young people to come together and explore their sense of identity and purpose and belonging, by learning ancestral skills as a way of connecting to the earth and their hands and their hearts, and then also these interpersonal skills. And you know, people talk about rites of passage, they need to be a response to the time. You know, they're such an ancient practice, and a big part of this work is trying to unearth like what were our indigenous frameworks for rites of passage and what makes sense to this land, and also what are the challenges that are facing youth today, and how do we respond to that and give them honest, open opportunities for dialogue about these things, you know. So yeah, more and more I'm drawn to this type of work because I feel like it really encapsulates all that I believe in. So I'll also be hosting vision fasts for adults as well, which was through the lineage of the School of Lost Borders, which is a school in North America that has been teaching vision fasts or holding vision fasts and training people to hold vision fast for 40 years.
Like a vision quest kind of thing.
Yeah. And I suppose the School of Lost Borders, and I choose to use vision fast because of the lineage of quest within Native American culture. So trying to not to appropriate those cultures and kind of borrowing this phrase while we search for what our own is, you know, and borrowing these frameworks while we really dig into who are we, you know, and where do we come from, and who, yeah. So yeah, it's I mean, I really hope that all of these things can go ahead this year, but that's certainly what I'm moving towards, and putting that out as a very strong intention into the world. Yeah. So I really believe in them, and the ripples that can come from those kind of experiences.
And how has been the response so far? I mean, you've just relaunched it recently, so
yeah. I mean, great. It's not, the bookings aren't open yet, so I can't say for sure. Okay. It was really just letting like people know that this is what we have done, to release the video of. We had a video made from an amazing videographer called Rosie Barrett, and releasing the logo that Sean Fitzgerald had really kindly done for us, and releasing what it is that we're doing and what is the intention behind what we're doing. And then in February, we'll take another look at the world and see where we're at. And hopefully, yeah, what we would love is for this to be happening next Easter, as a kind of 3 months long program for young people. And just grow it from there, you know. It's I think, I mean, I'm just 30, but as I get older, as I do this work more, I choose my steps much more carefully, you know, and I'm really trying to not rush into things, you know. It might seem that way, but it's taken a lot of thought. And I mean, the rites of passage, I've been doing trainings all of this year. I just dedicated the year to learning online with organizations that I really admire, and that has been a huge unraveling for me, of you know, when we do rites of passage work or becoming like a vision fast guide, it's, you have to do so much inner work, you know, like you really have to go back to your teenage self and sit with them and explore like what are all the things that you internalized and what are the messages that you have internalized in your adult life. And yeah, there's a lot of ceremony, there's a lot of process work, and um, it's really difficult and challenging and rich and beautiful and messy, and yeah, it's all of the things.
And how can we find out about all of these offerings on
Mhm.
your, it's all on your website, or just you're
Yeah.
working on it? Yeah.
Yeah, so I would really encourage people to sign up to my newsletter. I'm really trying to move away from social media more and more. So yeah, I'll be releasing that through my newsletter, and in the, you know, I'll be also working through Instagram and Facebook while that time is there. And yeah, so people can sign up for my kind of generic mailing list through Wild Awake, and then through the rites of passage they can also sign up just to be kept informed about the rites of passage or the vision fast work as well.
Great. And you're not doing any more the tending the wild? You used to do that as well, which sounded absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I'll definitely be doing that. I've only been able to run it once, but it was so amazing. Yeah, I had to cancel it both times this year. So those people will be coming in April, and I'll announce one for October again. I'm just feel very cautious about announcing anything these days, you know. But yeah, I will certainly be continuing that. I absolutely, it's such a joy to work in Donegal and to be with the people that I have known for so long, and yeah, in a place that I love so much. So
And how long are they, the tending the wild
they're
ones?
5 days.
For 5 days. Yeah.
Yeah, 5 days. Yeah. So at the moment I've been running with spring ones, which are really focused on spring greens and birch sap and seaweeds, and then the autumn, which is focused more on mushrooms and fruit and nuts and
Nice.
good stuff. Yeah, yeah.
And sign up before it's booked out.
No.
And also, can you tell us a little bit how you've put together that Wild Awakening program? Because it's amazing. You've got these amazing guest teachers, and how do you work? Do you work with others to put together your offerings, or
Mhm.
how do you function?
I suppose like it's something that I have wanted to offer for a really long time, based upon my own experience of doing immersive long-term programs. You know, for me, it was really how I developed as a facilitator and as a person. So, you know, initially it was going to be a long-term program solely focused on plants, and then, you know, I just for me, the creative process of coming up with these things is probably my favorite part, you know, or I love doing it as well. But it's just, you know, waking in the middle of the night with an idea, or going out for a walk and needing to like rush home to write something down. And so, you know, it's the people that I'm working with, I've been really lucky to develop relationships with over these years. So really wanting to support their work, as well as, for me, if we're to have like this conversation around rewilding, like these are the elements that I think are really important actually in a journey of rewilding.
And
So
it's
that
also
is, yeah.
about,
Mhm.
sorry, it's also about, it seems, working with native wisdom keepers, isn't it? It's, which is
Yeah.
very interesting. It's not bringing in indigenous from elsewhere, which is often the case in many programs. But here you're working with native indigenous
Yeah,
people
yeah,
from Ireland.
absolutely. And yeah, I mean, you know, Irish travellers are the indigenous ethnic minority of Ireland, and they have so much to offer, you know, and there's so much healing to do in those relationships. And I think it can be very tempting sometimes to look elsewhere, and, you know, it's, those people also have amazing things to offer, but we really I feel need to tend to the relationships that are here and now as well. And I'm so lucky to, you know, have a friendship with Owen de Vardoon. And he's just amazing, and he's such great crack, and he tends so deeply to his own culture, and he cares so deeply for it. And I don't know if you got his book Why the Moon Travels, but
No,
it's
I was
really,
going to ask
oh
the
God,
question on that. Yeah.
oh, it's
Yeah.
amazing, really, really beautiful. So I'm so thrilled that he would consider to teach with me again. And then, yes, of course, up in Donegal, working with Margaret Kitty and Cahalo Sharkey and people who are, you know, native Irish speakers and remember the first time they heard English, and just have a really deep connection to the plants and the earth, to the point where it's like, it's not a big deal to them, you know. And I often get that impression from Indigenous people around the world that I've been fortunate enough to speak with or meet with, that it's like, yeah, I mean, we have such a hunger for this, you know, in Western industrialized society. And it's trying to get people to explain that connection to the earth is almost inexplicable, you know, to them, because that is just, that's life, you know. And so, yeah, I mean, yeah,
So
painful.
I guess we're nearly close to the time, but I just wanted to ask you, what would you recommend, since people are going to be resting a little bit for a few days there? What books you would recommend reading at the moment? What has inspired you greatly in your journey?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely recommend Owen's book, Why the Moon Travels. It's a beautiful collection of Irish traveller folk tales.
Wonderful.
Um, I would also recommend Braiding Sweet Grass by Robin Wall Kimmerer to absolutely everybody. And she has an amazing, she speaks the audiobook as well, and she has a beautiful voice. Um,
And she's an ethnobotanist as well, just like you.
she's she might describe herself as an ethnobotanist. She's an ecologist. She's a scientist, and she marries this with her indigenous wisdom, so it's a really exceptional insight into that relationship, and yeah, very transformative in the way that I've approached plants and approached my relationship to the earth, definitely. um what else? I would definitely recommend Ironman's journal that I produced. So that was a zine, a journal that myself and Shan Fitzgerald produced. So that's still available to buy through my website. And that's a collection of articles and stories from people who have a connection to this land and the plants of this land. So it's folklore and foraging and remedies. And yeah, that's a great one to read. Yeah, I'm reading a book at the moment called Hearts and Hands. I can't remember the author's name right now, but it's a lot about rites of passage and yeah, our responsibility to the youth. Um,
Beautiful.
yeah.
And I hear you're a fan of David Abram as well.
Yeah. I mean, I love the spell of the sensuous, and I love to listen to him. I do definitely find him a little bit too intellectual for me at times, but I appreciate I appreciate his words. And Sharon Blackie as well. I love to read her books too. And Clarissa Pinkola Estes has a gorgeous collection of podcasts and online audiobooks as well. And Francis Weller, I've been listening to a lot of his stuff online as well. And Michael Mead,
Yes.
again, he's producing a lot of stuff online too. Oh God, there's so many. I mean, and there's so many incredible podcasts as well, like Bespoken Bones and For the Wild and On Being and Blurini folk tales from Ireland as well. Yeah, there's so much out there. It's good to,
Wonderful. Yeah. I'm reading the 32 Words Fulfilled.
Of course, yeah, that too.
That's a great
That's
one.
so beautiful. Have you got a favorite word yet?
Oh gosh, my Irish. So far, I love pukin. I don't know, probably not saying it right.
What was the meaning behind it?
It's the whole trembling in the darkness kind of idea. I think it's puka. It's to do with puka.
Yeah, puka.
Yeah, I think it's just it's such a beautiful way of describing something that you could connect with dark matter as well, with something that's astronomical, as well as, you know, in just magic, surreal, supernatural. And he speaks really well about that. And you mentioned that as well, the fact that there's so much of the magic in the natural world that we've lost because of the loss of words in our language and our connection to the roots of our languages, of our native languages.
I really appreciate this book that he's written, and I really appreciate how accessible it is. You know, it's so poetic, and it's I've been reading it since it came out, but it's been one of those books where you just have to put it down after a few lines and just really like live into those words and go out and see them and embody them. And
So
there was a word ceap, CEAP, and it's the word for a blacksmith's kind of block that's embedded into the earth to stabilize it, but it also meant like the sense of support and belonging felt by an individual in a community. So like just that embeddedness into the earth and the support all around. I loved that. And there was another word, I can't remember it, but it was, you know, there's a whole chapter about seaweed, because seaweed is so important to us as a culture and as an island. And it was a word that described the ripples on the surface of the water when there's seaweed below it. And it's like, I know that ripple, you know, like I see it when I'm out foraging for seaweed, and to know that there's a word for that is just like, oh yeah. I mean, I'm really would love to learn more of our language. You know, it's so beautiful, and I really look forward to the day that I can less awkwardly wrap my tongue around the words. And
me too. And I'm not a native speaker at all, so it's even more complicated.
I always like say the words with a French accent, because that's the only like foreign language I've ever spoken, and it's to try and get that into my mind of I don't need to put on an accent, you know. It's like it's my dialect. So I mean, I would love, that's something I would love to do in my life, is to move to Donegal and to learn Irish. It's definitely something that will happen.
Lovely. Sounds beautiful. Just one last piece of wisdom I wanted to ask from you. If you were to give advice to leaders right now in Ireland, in Europe, what would you ask them to do to change things, to tackle and address the current crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose my plea would be that we listen to the voices of the marginalized and to indigenous people as well, and recognize that these are the people that have lived at the fringes and have lived through many apocalypses and many, you know, pandemics of all sorts, that they have so much to offer us in terms of how to navigate a way through this time. So I think we've heard quite enough from certain voices, and it's time to make room. Actually, I was going to say make room at the table, but I think we just need a whole different table, you know, and hopefully one that's maybe spread out on the ground in the forest or something, you know.
Sounds beautiful.
That would be my wish.
I hold that vision for us, indeed. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Lucy, for your time.
Thank you.
It's been lovely. Really.
Yeah, great nourishment for me too. I really appreciated all your questions, and yeah, your way of being is so beautiful and reassuring. And I'd love to know more about your work as well at some stage.
I'm sure we'll get to meet soon. I'm dying to go on one of your journeys, programs in nature. So I'll definitely pay you a visit at some point soon.
I will let you know when I know when things will happen. I'd love for you to join me.
Thank you. Best wishes with it.
Yeah. Okay. See you soon, Sophie.
Bye.
Ciao.